account. Just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
If John was beaten up and attacked in that house, who did it?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. And it's not for us to know. Somebody other than Karen is responsible for that, for the killing of John.
Roberta in the truth zone, mic hitting raw. Spotlight shining, she exposing the flaw. Debunking the myth, breaking their facade. This is Glass City, respect the squad. On these NYC blocks where the skyline flex big. Roberta Glass slicing lies with a truth rig. Innocence frosters, your stories unravel. She's a map through the madness of gritty gravel. Glass don't bend and facts don't break. She's a storm that's called, you feel the quake. Exposing tales stitched with crooked seams. Justice in the lens, shattered fake dreams. Screams about killers, painted heroes in disguise. She burning propaganda with fire in her eyes. No glamour for the guilty, she call it straight. She backs victims, the voice stay awake. Stats and receipts, no spin, no clutter. Cold cases whisper, she cuts through the mutter. Truth's her tempo, don't confuse the beat. She's standing for the real while you taking a seat. True crime's a block, facts the artillery. Spinning those lies, yo, she checks that misery. Tabloid tales get smashed, no time to play. She's glass hard, break the false and save the day. True crime's a block, facts the artillery. Spinning those lies, yo, she checks that misery. Tabloid tales get smashed, no time.
Okay. How is everybody? How you doing? Betty? Deb? Gardenia? You're new here? Welcome, welcome. Hello, Joan. Hello, Dean Walker. Hope your grandbaby's doing well. Francoise, Deb H, Cat in the Hat. Well, it was your latex spouse. Thank you. Thank you, all my moderators. It was another difficult day for Karen Read, but I'll tell you why I think this was the best day, maybe the best day in the whole trial for Karen Read. In Karen Read's side. It may be, let's put it that way. It may be the best day for Karen Read, the way I see it. Because the testimony was, again, just another nail in her coffin. We had a neurosurgeon who, Dr. Wolf, reminds me, I don't know how many saw the thumbnail of Mr. Wolf, the fixer in Pulp Fiction. He comes and fixes things. I mean, he just was so on top of his game, explained, complicated medical concepts. I don't know how complicated, but sophisticated. Let's put it that way. Sophisticated medical concepts in a way that everyone could understand. And he wasn't a professional witness. He was a professional neurosurgeon who deals with brain injuries. And what he said is that, and this is what we heard in last trial, is that had Karen Read gotten help, instead of starting her cover-up and saving herself and working very hard to avoid taking any responsibility for her own behavior or own crime, that there was a small chance, not a great chance, I think it's in the 30% chance that John O'Keefe would have lived. It was difficult testimony to hear, but that these brain injuries with this swelling of the brain take a long time. We're going to look at it, and we're going to look at the cross-examination. Again, Robert Alessi, very short, uncharacteristic cross-examination by Robert Alessi. All that, then we had a woman from the Massachusetts State Police come back and say that they found glass matching the glass in his hand, the glass, Karen Reed's cocktail glass on the bumper. Now, just more evidence that these two scenarios, if there was any doubt from yesterday that John O'Keefe's fatal injuries and Karen Reed's reversal were any more connected, here's another connection for you. If you don't want to accept the hair on the back of the bumper, if you want to buy the defense claim that really it was John O'Keefe's nephew who liked to use the bumper as a pillow, I guess that's what they're going to say, and his hair somehow was found on the back of the bumper, which to me is so hilarious because Free Karen Reed has been saying that hair had to be planted all along. How would it stick in the cold ice and snow? How would it, say, get frozen onto the back of the bumper, right? There's no possible way it had to be planted that this one hair would stay. And you would have to think that there may have been a lot more hairs, and that's the one that survived or stuck in the snow. May have been, don't know, could have been more. But that it was really the John O'Keefe's nephew who hadn't been around Karen Reed's car in at least, what is this? At least a day and a half, at least. And yet we're going to find a hair from him on the back bumper. To me, it didn't make sense. But even if you buy that, and even if you ignore all the DNA on the taillight pieces, or the fact that taillight pieces were found embedded in John O'Keefe's shirt, you can just accept that the car data and the phone data, right, that there was an incident that matched up with after which John O'Keefe stopped moving very shortly after, which means a reversal of her car, and it was an incident in her black box. So Karen Reed, of course, is putting on a good face. We'll go over that. But first, here, the best thing that happened to Karen Reed in this whole trial, and remember, we're only in the Commonwealth's case, so of course everything's going to look bad now. They haven't put on a defense. I think they're significantly, if this is a fair jury, they haven't really made any headway in their cross-examinations. I mean, it took me till this morning to figure out that, oh, that was an old LinkedIn. He didn't purposely lie and say he got that witness, Shannon Burgess. He just let it, I mean, he just didn't update his LinkedIn. Like Karen Reed hasn't updated her LinkedIn, or Alan Jackson, his LinkedIn apparently still says he's running for DA. So these things sort of, so meaning if you're planned to graduate in a certain year, you put that in, then it's going to, eventually that year comes and you don't get it. It looks like you're lying on your resume. So I think that was a really minor point. I think the Free Karen readers are really grasping. But we may be headed towards another hung jury because there was an incident this morning with the jury where they all had to be voir dired, meaning interviewed by the judge. I don't know how much the lawyers were involved, if it was just the judge and the lawyers, or the judge and just the judge and the lawyers watching. Curious how that went down. The courtroom was cleared out, and just Karen Reed and the lawyers and the judge and the jury were there, and they all answered questions. And afterwards, the judge made a speech about not talking to one another. We know that last trial that they were discussing the case. And this is what I say about the way that Judge Cannone asked that question. She asked with just the tone of her voice and the way her pitch goes up. No one would want to interrupt and say, oh, I saw something last night. So when you ask, like, okay, did everybody do that? Right? You did? You're going to get that kind of answer. Nobody's going to want to speak up in a crowd when everyone else around you is nodding their head. Did you all get a chance? You didn't talk to anyone? Good. She does this every morning. there has to be a better way to ask the jury than the way the Judge Cannone asks. No? But it looks like there's either some issue because the juror, after they came back, the juror moved between jurors. I know when I was a juror, the person in front of me wore like cologne that was giving me a massive headache, like really cheap cologne that was driving me crazy. I couldn't wait to get out of there at the end of the day. But I mean, are certain jurors not getting along or fighting, or are they talking about the case? Or are there certain free Karen readers on the jury that don't care about rules? Certainly bodes well. It's a good sign for free Karen read that there's already issues with the jury that was so carefully picked out. But let's hope this is just a personality clash and not a flagrant disregarding of the rules of the court. Right? So let's watch the news piece on this, and you can see Judge Cannone clear out the courtroom. Take a listen.
An issue has come to my attention.
Judge Beverly Cannone did not explain that issue, but she told the jurors she needed to speak with them one by one. So she cleared everyone out of the courtroom except Karen Reed and the lawyers for nearly an hour and a half.
I do need to stress for you that it's very, very important that no one discuss this case.
The judge told jurors that includes not listening to anyone about the case and not talking about it among themselves. When the jurors returned, all 18 were present, but a man seated nearest the witness stand had switched seats with a woman in the back row.
I do. Thank you.
The first witness of the day was a neurosurgeon from Miami. Dr. Ezek Wolf testified that John O'Keefe's head injuries were caused by his head hitting the frozen ground after Reed allegedly backed into him with her SUV.
My opinion is that that's what caused his whole injury.
Morning, doctor. I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting.
Defense attorney Robert Alessi was relatively short in his cross-examination, less than 10 minutes. He did point out that Wolf is not a forensic pathologist and doesn't perform autopsies.
So I found him not qualified to speak about what.
Right. Nobody's qualified except Karen Reed's experts. Like, can we talk about her qualified experts? McNasty Green, Richard Green with a criminal record, who they had to rewrite the whole Celebrate program for mistakes like his. and Marie Russell. Those are the only people who are qualified. You know, she's just echoing, this was the lawyer argument. They tried to get him out because he wasn't a forensic pathologist. And he had the best answer. He's like, no, I see more patients. I see more of these brain injuries than a forensic pathologist. I've seen more of them. So yeah. So I liked him as a witness. I thought he was an excellent witness. I was afraid that he'd be more of a professional witness, kind of a whore of the court, as Dominic Dunn used to call them, meaning their opinions up for sale. And I think he made a really good point. Clearly now they're saying, so this is what I find interesting, is they're saying that John O'Keefe got this injury. They're keeping the same theory as last time, which is that he got his head injury, his skull fracture and head injury from hitting the hard ground. But when they went to the scene of the crime, 34 Fairview, the jury did, before they went, Hank Brennan asked them to look at the spoiler of the car, so the part of the Karen Reed's SUV that sticks out. What do you think that was about, if not his head injury? You'd be clipped and hit the side of it. So is he giving jurors an option so that if they don't buy that he could crack his skull open on, you can crack your skull open on, a hard floor, the ground, we know frozen ground is just extremely, just like cracking your head on some kind of marble or something when it's really, really hard like that. Is he giving them a second option so that if you don't buy that he could have gotten this head injury? What would be the point? Am I missing something of telling jurors to look at the top of the car where it sticks out besides the head injury? Let me know what you guys think. please hit the thumbs up. Let us get the algorithm going. So she doesn't think anyone's qualified. So this is where we were. No one's qualified to speak if they don't have a degree, if they're not a forensic pathologist. And I mean, we can talk about cause of death and not knowing what caused the death. We know that cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head and hypothermia. But they're not detectives. Those, they can give you a cause of death, but they not a, what do you say? They can't look into a crystal ball and tell you what happened.
A medical examiner should.
Why didn't Mr. Alessi ask him more questions then?
We have our own medical examiner coming in.
This woman was basically fired from her position in Rhode Island because she was so thousands of reports behind, and it was so disorganized, the office that she ran. And she's basically now has a career as a hired gun for killers and other criminals, accused criminals.
Now, tomorrow was originally scheduled to be a half day of testimony in this trial, but the judge told the jurors that the trial is going ahead of schedule, so she decided to give them the whole day off tomorrow, and on Friday, testimony will resume on Tuesday.
Why don't they come in tomorrow and then get this case ahead of schedule? Why do they have to stay on schedule? Why can't they end the trial ahead of schedule? You know what I mean? Why can't we just end, or is that the way we're going? Because I think that if we end next week for the Commonwealth, I don't think it'll be I think it'll go to the jury either end of next week or the week after. I don't think the defense is going to be, I don't think it's going to be an extremely long, I think it's going to be 3 or 4 days. So we'll see, but it is a short week next week. So maybe the week after next, it'll go to the jury. Yeah, this is awful long break, right? But maybe they can do both. Maybe they'll start ahead of schedule. So here is Dr. Wolf testifying. I thought it was extremely effective and also engaging. Hank Brennan is really, this is like a performance, like he's a director, and he's gotten pretty much the most engaging witnesses, the witnesses that can connect with the jury the most, witnesses that can't be disparaged. I guess they can, even if you're a neurosurgeon. Apparently you're not qualified according to Karen Reed. So here's from today. Here's the Dr. Wolf. Here's his testimony.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spell your first name and last name for the court reporter?
Sure. My first name is Isaac, A-I-Z-I-K. It's phonetic. Last name is Wolf, W-O-L-F, like the real thing.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a brain surgeon.
Is there a special part of medicine that you study?
Well, my main interest in brain surgery is brain tumors and trigeminal neuralgia. But I also specialize in movement disorders. I do pediatrics and adults.
Are you an active working neurosurgeon?
I am very active working neurosurgeon. I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning to go to work, 5 days a week. I take call 300 days out of 365 days a year.
Did you work yesterday?
Yes, I did.
What type of work did you do yesterday?
I did 2 brain surgeries yesterday.
Are you working tomorrow?
I have 4 surgeries scheduled for tomorrow, which is why this is a little bit delayed for me, and I have 4 on Friday.
And what type of surgeries do you have tomorrow and Friday?
I have 3 brain tumors, 1 trigeminal neuralgia, and on Friday I have 4 patients with movement disorders.
You're here today as a witness. How much of your practice, how much percent of your income is from being a consultant or a witness for a case?
Probably less than 1%. I don't do this for a living.
I want you to take us through some of your education and background. Could you share with us where you went to medical school and where you graduated from?
I went to Yale Medical School. I graduated summa cum laude.
Is that in 1981 that you graduated?
Correct.
After medical school, did you begin internships in medical residency?
I did an internship at Hennepin County Medical Center, which is a trauma center in Minneapolis. I then did 5 years of neurosurgical residency at the University of Minnesota.
And was that in Minnesota?
Correct, in Minneapolis.
You know what's curious is that usually the way to discredit these kind of hired witnesses, so like people who don't work on, say, like a salary for the Massachusetts State Police, is to ask them how much they're getting paid to testify and how much they've made so far testifying. Do you notice that the defense hasn't asked any questions like that of the witnesses getting paid in this trial? Like they didn't ask, did I miss it? I didn't hear them ask Shannon Burgess this yesterday or Dr. Wolf. Is it because when it comes time for their witnesses, they're going to be paid so much more? Except for Marie Russell hasn't been asked what she's making in this case. You know, it's like $600 an hour is like low. So curious. I mean, with ARCA witnesses, they say they don't get paid extra. I can't believe that only ARCA gets paid. And they just do whatever ARCA assigns them to do. Really? Does it really work that way? I'm so curious. But I would think that they would ask him how much are you getting paid, meaning that you have a financial incentive to say this.
Is there something about that hospital that has some specialty?
It was one of the #1 training centers for chairmen in neurosurgery at the time.
Did you, in your residency and in your fellowships, do any work or study in pathology?
During your residency as a neurosurgical resident, you do 6 months in neurology, you do 3 months of neuroradiology, you do 3 months in pathology, which includes autopsies on brains. And then you do rotations through a trauma center as a chief resident, through a VA hospital, and then ultimately at the university hospital for elective cases. We also do 6 months of pediatric neurosurgical residency.
Did you do a fellowship at New York University?
Yeah, at NYU, I did a fellowship before I went to the University of Maryland as a professor in brain transplantation. The interest was in using cells to create dopamine centers in rat brains with the concept of Parkinson's being curable with transplantation.
I'd like you to take us through some of your faculty positions, and so you can share with us some of the progression of your training and experience. Did you begin at the University of Maryland Hospital?
Yes. In 1987, the University of Maryland recruited me to start their epilepsy surgical program and skull-based program. And then part of our responsibilities as assistant professors was to cover shock trauma.
Could you explain for us what shock trauma means and whether the University of Maryland Hospital was a shock trauma hospital?
So the University of Maryland and shock trauma were actually 2 separate entities when I started. A man named Cowley had basically developed the concept of the golden hour. So prior to Dr. Cowley, most trauma was just taken locally. That meant as a community hospital, if a patient had been in a motor vehicle accident, they needed an orthopedic surgeon, they had to call the orthopedic surgeon in, could take 15 minutes, could take 3 hours. The same thing for a vascular surgeon, the same thing for a neurosurgeon. Dr. Cowley came up with the concept that you needed a center that was strictly for trauma, and every attending had to be in the hospital 24/7. So that was the concept of shock trauma back in the 80s. When I got there, we were transitioning from a very small center to a 125-bed hospital that was completely committed to trauma.
In that experience, in the years you worked there, did you have an opportunity to treat a number of people with brain injuries?
We treated well over 100 patients a year, a month, basically, with brain injuries at shock trauma, along with spinal cord injuries.
Did you perform surgeries in different types of brain trauma and brain injuries?
Yes.
After Maryland in 1993, did you move to Miami Neuroscience Center?
Yes. In 1993, I left academics. I went into private practice in Miami, and I started the Miami Neuroscience Center. We were the first private community hospital to have what's called the Gamma Knife. So we were the 13th in the country, but the only one that was non-university based. And Gamma Knife radiosurgery is using radiation to operate on the brain.
Are you presently the director of the Miami Neuroscience Center at Larkin Hospital?
Yes, I am.
Do you conduct a number of surgeries a year there?
Correct. So I spent 19 years at Doctors Hospital, and then we moved to Larkin Hospital 13 years ago.
Yeah, not qualified. So this is a curious case of order with these witnesses. So yesterday we had Shannon Burgess, who had 10 years of experience, but not a college degree, and he wasn't qualified because of that, right? Now we have a Yale neurosurgeon, graduated, what was it, summa cum laude from Yale, and is head of his department and is operating with radiation, and he's still not acceptable to Karen. She just echoes these things, like she's really picked up on Alessi's talking points and just echoing them. I think she thinks she's a junior lawyer.
Developing the new radiosurgical unit called ZAP, and also another fancy machine called high frequency ultrasound to treat the movement disorders.
You've noted that you have a number of professional memberships. I don't want to go through all of them. I'd like to point out a few. Are you a professional member of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons?
Yes.
Are you a member or fellow American of the College of Surgeons?
Yes.
Are you a member of North American Skull-Based Society?
Yes.
And is that brain related?
It is.
Are you a member of the Society for Neuro-Oncology?
Yes.
Are you a member of over or at least 34 different professional memberships?
Yes.
In your career, have you engaged in research?
Yes.
Has that research focused or centered?
Are you a member of the Roberta Glass True Crime Report? No. Why not? That should be the next question. Are you a channel member at the Roberta Glass True Crime Report? If not, why not? Should have been this question.
On brain injury?
Yes, it has.
Is some of your research as a principal investigator for THAM, FAM treatment of brain tissue, acidosis, and severely head injured patients?
Yes.
Did that research and as a principal investigator help you in your diagnosis and treatment of brain injuries?
It actually was in the treatment of severe head injuries, patients who are unconscious. The concept of trying to relieve the increased intracranial pressure that occurs from the injury and to increase blood flow, thereby increasing oxygen to the brain.
Did you also serve as principal investigator for research for the PEG, SOD, and severe head injury?
Yes.
Could you describe that very briefly?
Basically the same, one of the biggest problems in
Who asked why Daddy Reed is wearing his trench coat? That's his Burberry trench coat. They all dress in designer clothes. That's his staple. Karen Reed, the They think that if they can present well and look well, that they can, they've hid behind this phony, false persona their whole life. Till the mask slips and he has to have, I mean, if I moved the camera, if I did a wide shot, you would see that next to him is a guard who's babysitting him the entire trial. I've never seen anything like that. I've seen people get kicked out of court. Like I've said many times before, I saw journalists get kicked out for a look, giving a look in the Nexium case. I've seen people admonished, but I've never seen someone have to have a security guard sit next to them the entire trial in the gallery. Never. Has anyone else seen anything like this? Let alone a relative of the defendant. I've never seen anything like it. So I don't believe that what he did was stare down the jury or wink at the jury or juror. I think it's something much more disruptive for Judge Cannone to come up with this agreement. And she doesn't, I mean, we saw fraud, a year long of fraud from the ARCA witnesses. We saw them give perjured testimony, just lie straight up to the jury about being paid, about how well they knew the defense, about having no bias. And this went on in filings from the defense team. And then when it got revealed, it was a huge lie. Or when they get rid of, say, 100 text messages and delete them on both sides, so both parties do. So when the lawyer said, oh, we all deleted those messages between my client's expert witness, which is essentially their expert witness, and they're supposed to hold records of everything related to their client for, I think, up to 6 to 10 years, not 6 to 10 months. They said, they're all old. I deleted all those text messages, so I can't hand over discovery, which is a pattern with this defense team. So they ambush the Commonwealth. That's their technique. Just, they don't want to know, they don't want the Commonwealth to know the right questions to ask. They don't want to know where the defense is going. So when Hank Brennan, when they lied to the court and said, they might have been telling the truth. We deleted them because that's our practice. That is what I think the lie is, that it's their practice to delete. So Hank Brennan says, well, we'll bring in ARCA and we'll ask them for the text messages. Lo and behold, ARCA deleted those same text messages and is talking to Karen Reed on an encrypted app, her favorite way. I mean, talking to the defense, which I think includes Karen Reed, on a encrypted app, which is Karen Reed's favorite encrypted app, the same encrypted app she talks to Aiden Turtleboy Carney on, which you can set it to auto delete. So as soon as you send a text message, it deletes. So there's been a real concerted effort by the defense team to hide the communications between themselves and their experts and hide their expert opinions and hide their relationships. We know that Daniel Wolf, with an E for ARCA, his wife joined the Free Karen Reed Facebook group after he testified, like directly after he testified. I mean, they're so biased. And nothing happened to them. They got a talking to, and they started lying within minutes after getting that talking to about candor with the court from Cannone. So this is why I think Karen Reed's father did something really disruptive in court to get a guard sitting next to him, and more disruptive than winking once at the jury or staring them down. I mean, when the jury gets up on breaks, the guard guards them from Karen Reed's father. It's wild.
Brain injury is the fact that blood flow ceases to exist as the brain swells up. And so one of the things we try to do is preserve the neurons by making sure that they have enough oxygen and blood flow to them. All these are agents that try to assist that.
I won't go through all of your research and principal investigator roles, but I want to ask you about one more. And that is, did you serve as principal investigator relative to the IRB protocol for brain pathology?
Yes.
And what did that do? What was that about?
It was about looking at what happens after brain injury to blood vessels and tissue as the intracranial pressure increases in the brain.
So I just sped up the tape a little bit so we can make it through this tonight. Not that I have anywhere to go, but just so we get through it at a reasonable time. Joan, thank you for becoming a member. Now you can say you're a member. You're asked on the stand. You can say truthfully you're a member. Congrats. Thank you. Enjoy the new emojis I put up. I know there's with Maestro, who I don't know where he is today. He must have had that other prior engagement. There's one for John O'Keefe with his badge number, Justice for John O'Keefe. There's one with Hank Brennan in shadow with his doing this shh about ARCA. There's No Traction Jackson. There's Bunny Boiler for Karen Reed. There's Psychopath. Lots of custom emojis. Maui Swift, very generous of you. Thank you so much for gifting 5 memberships, though passed out at random. And Doc, thanks so much. Okay.
Have you been part of publications of a number of different books?
Yes.
I won't list parts of all 16 books, but can I point out a few?
Sure.
Were you the author of a book chapter regarding head injury, difficult medical management?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter on pediatric neurosurgical emergencies?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter on complications of head injuries in adults?
Yes.
Were you an author of a book chapter, imaging of craniocerebral trauma?
Yes.
Were you an author of a book chapter in emergency room assessment of the head injury patient?
Yes.
Were you the author of a book chapter, intracranial injuries?
Yes.
I won't list or ask you about the other book chapters that you've been the author of. Have you been involved in journal articles?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you just about a few of the 70 journal articles that you have published.
Your Honor, objection. So go ahead and ask the question without comments, please.
Were you an author of a journal article, Intracranial Pressure in Non-Traumatic Ischemia and Hypoxic Cerebral Insults?
Yes.
Were you the author of a journal article, Post-Traumatic Cerebral Infraction?
Yes.
Were you the author of the journal Fractures of the Clivus?
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that paper?
We used thin cut CT scans to identify fractures of the skull base. Prior to CT scans, it was very difficult to actually identify radiologically a skull fracture with plain x-rays. The idea was to see if we could identify them more clearly. And so we classified them and delineated them in the paper and discussed the outcomes that were relative to those type of injuries.
In the last journal article I'll ask you about, were you the author of a journal article regarding acute traumatic midbrain hemorrhage?
Yes.
Were you the presenter in a number of presentations regarding head injury and brain injury?
Yes.
You've listed 93. I'll ask you just about a few. Were you a presenter in fractures of the clivus, clinical and radiographic features?
Yes.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Clivus.
Thank you. Were you the presenter in acute head injury?
Yes.
And a separate presentation, fractures of the clivus, classifications and clinical features?
Yes.
Do you lecture?
Yes.
Do you have peer-reviewed publications?
Yes. That was one of them.
And are you heavily involved in clinical research?
Right now, my research is more based on radiosurgical techniques and outcomes.
Over your career and your study and your clinical experience, have you treated different types of brain injuries?
Yes.
Are you familiar with a number of different types of brain injuries?
Yes, we still treat them.
Were you asked to review materials relative to this case?
Yes.
And do you recall the materials that you reviewed?
Yes.
Could you share with us some of the materials that you reviewed?
I reviewed the chief medical examiner's assessment of the case. I reviewed pictures that I'm assuming the medical examiner took of the autopsy, and I reviewed the report from the forensic pathologist.
And before I ask you about your review of specific materials and your opinions in this case, is there a benefit to your clinical experience in studying brain injuries as opposed to the experience you had as a fellow simply with pathology?
Well, I think that for the jury to understand is a clinician understands the process from the time the injury occurs till the patient either leaves the hospital or dies. And it's a process. And as a neurosurgeon, I have a tremendous amount of experience with that, if that's what you're asking me.
Yes. And so, Doctor, you reviewed a number of items of information in this case. Did you have an opportunity to review photographs of a laceration to Mr. John O'Keefe's head?
Yes, I did.
With the court's permission, I'm going to ask to display Exhibit 160.
Okay.
So did you guys see that? So I mean, just no reaction, no sadness, no hint of sadness on her face. So this is a little ahead. So you can see when the lights go down. Let me see if I can go back just a little bit. So they're showing John O'Keefe's head injury. So, there we go. Watch Karen Reed's face. Not a hint of sadness.
You have an opportunity to
Just, I mean, if anything, that's resentment and anger face. Still, I think everything she does tells us how much she hates him. Still. I mean, it's like we're still in the value discard phase with John O'Keefe.
review photographs of a laceration to Mr. John O'Keefe's head.
Yes, I did.
With the court's permission, I'm going to ask to display Exhibit 160.
Okay.
Dr. Wolf, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this photograph. Have you seen this?
Anya says, I just realized Brennan definitely brought him in today to clean up resume guy from yesterday. I think he's taking the piss out of the defense to go this in on education. Haha, Brennan's a genius. Right. So whether you have no education or you've been to some of our most prestigious institutions, American institutions. I'm not saying they're the best. I'm just saying they're the most prestigious. And graduate at the top of your class. They all conclude the same thing. Whether you have a lot of experience on the job, doing your job, and not a lot of education, sounds like from more of a working class background or from a more privileged background. I don't know if Isaac Wolf is from a more privileged background, but he certainly excelled academically. They all conclude this same thing. And what I thought was so brilliant about yesterday, Tanya, is that you didn't have to believe any of Burgess's. So that's the accident forensic analysis from yesterday. You didn't have to believe any of his testimony. You could totally dismiss it. All you had to do was believe Karen Reed, who's saying, yeah, we think he died right after my car had an incident, right in that time period, 12:25 to 12:30. Okay, so, free Karen readers can come screaming because it was 12:31 and some seconds. But come on. Did we expect this? Right? And so Karen Reed, Boundless Millennial, made a great video. I showed this today on the live stream. And I might show it again, if you don't mind me skipping back and forth. I hope not. But, well, that's blasting through my headphones. which is basically that they tried to use wrong data, basically sync up all the data and not ignore the phone drift. So John O'Keefe's phone was off by, I believe it was up to 29 seconds. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's just my memory of it. And they just totally ignored that and tried to make their argument. This is why they were so angry that this testimony got in, is they were basically trying to pull a fast one over the jury. Here, let me show you his short. It's excellent. Here we go. Karen Reed, day 19.
Oh, I've never seen before even reaching the stand. Oh, I've never seen an expert face plant this hard before even reaching the stand.
Ding, ding.
ARCA didn't just get discredited by someone with an associate's degree. They got academically cremated before even opening their mouths.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Their report is a
Boundless Millennials, so he always picks like the perfect little clip to put in his videos, doesn't he?
Fan fiction riddled with misinterpretations, just like our favorite contortionist over at McNasty's, Rich Green. And
I started calling him McNasty Green. I hope that spreads. I hope more people, because that's where he got arrested. So if you don't know, Richard Green is the forensic analysis for the defense. And he's the one who, quote unquote, identified the 227, which never existed, phone search by Jen McCabe. And when he made that error, they tried to contact him and tell him he was wrong. But he said, he never called them back. He said, I tried to call Celebrate. So Celebrate rewrote their whole program so people wouldn't mistake a browser being open from an actual time search. So Richard Green was drinking at a bar called McNasty's, and he grabbed a waitress's arm, and there were these guys there going, yo, 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 like, ease off, get off her, and he's like, I'll do whatever I want. And he like moved off. This is how I assume. This is my own dialogue, not, I'll do whatever I want, all drunk, and fell off his stool and said that these two guys hit him. So for wrongly accusing these two guys of violence, he had to plead out and causing a disturbance and, all these other things. So that's one of it. I heard also, but I haven't, if anyone has any information about him getting caught lying in another case, let me know. Lying to the court in another case, let me know. I've heard that happen, but I haven't come across any information about it. So that's McNasty Green. That's who he's talking about there.
This is what makes it so egregious. They purposely took timestamps from John O'Keefe's phone and Karen Reed's phone and try to pretend that the timestamps were from the Lexus infotainment system to deceive the jury. Because if you look at the times here, we know that she wasn't in the car in the middle of the night. The car was not on, but they're comparing her phone calls, which then synced into the Lexus once she started that car at the time from her iPhone, and used those times to say, look, they're only 1 to 2 seconds apart. It's not true. It's a farce, and they know this. It's intentional. And this is why their report came so late on May 7th, because they were hoping nobody would notice that they Frankensteined all their timestamps so that they could shove a killer with no ass through a loophole. But he used a capital B instead of a small b, and he never updated his LinkedIn. I mean, it's one thing to have some typos in a report, but this isn't just sloppy. This is intentional misrepresentation of data. ARCA tried to retrofit a timeline to exonerate a woman who got caught in a web of her own lies. And they got caught trying to duct tape 2 different devices into one false alibi. Karen Reed's rapid reverse event coincides with John O'Keefe never moving again and then getting colder and colder and colder. This has officially earned them a seat in the Forensics Hall of Shame. next to Rick Green at McNasty's. Enjoy the dollar drafts, bitches.
Okay. You know, I love that he's bringing up McNasty's into it. But he's really good at making those videos and simplifying a lot of testimony into a really short. He's really good at those shorts.
Photograph before?
Yes.
I want you to explain to us what you're seeing here and take us through the process of your observations.
Well, what we're seeing is an approximate 1.5 inch laceration with bridging tissue and contusions and abrasions. To us, that's just a classic blunt trauma injury. There's nothing other than just vanilla about it. This is what happens when soft.
I love that he said that. There's nothing. Did he say that it's vanilla or not vanilla?
Nothing other than just vanilla about it.
There's nothing other than vanilla. It's a vanilla head injury. I thought that was an interesting way to describe it. Marina Sultana, thank you so much. Appreciate it. JMS, thank you for the super sticker. Jackie Joe, thank you very much. Wesley loves Octoberfest. Is competing with Maui Swiffer. He's going to be the sugar daddy of the sugar mama or sugar daddy of the live stream, giving away 10 memberships. Thank you so much. Those will be passed out at random. That's very generous. Thank you.
This is what happens when soft tissue hits a solid ground. The skin tears apart a bit, but not through and through. As you can see, there's the bridging. You can see all the bruising or contusions and just the tear, a little bit serrated along the edges.
Thank you. If you could take that down. Dr. Wolf, as a result of that wound, did you have a chance to further look at information provided to you about the actual inside the skull of Mr. John O'Keefe?
Yes, it was the pictures that I was reviewing showed a non-depressed skull fracture extending linearly through the clivus and into the frontal fossa of Mr. O'Keefe over the orbital roofs. He had fractures along the temporal fossa as well. So it was a classic linear basilar skull fracture.
Is basal skull fracture a
It's
characterization?
basically the base of your skull is what it encompasses. So the opening at the very bottom is what we call the foramen magnum. That connects your brainstem to your spinal cord. And then as your brainstem goes up, it goes into the different skull areas that, talk about what we call the cerebral cortexes, your occipital lobe, your temporal lobes over here, and then your frontal lobes.
So can you walk us through what happens when someone incurs this type of injury to the back of the head, how it happens, and what are the next steps for a person?
So what happens is, you fall backwards, and the linear acceleration starts to take you back down with gravity. The skull hits the ground. It gets, in layman's terms, smashed a little bit. And then the brain moves forward as a response to that. And it moves forward because you have cerebral spinal fluid and because you have the deceleration, acceleration again. As it does, your skull, if you're to look inside your skull, it's like mini mountains along your temporal bones and your frontal bones. So the brain is being thrust forward at a fairly good speed, and it's getting bruised. You can think of it as if you took a hammer to your thumb. It's really turning black and blue. Those are the contusions. And so the temporal poles and the frontal poles are getting contusions because of that. At the same time, you have a space called the subarachnoid space. And I'm sure they're going to hear about the subarachnoid hemorrhage. And that space is it's very clear, thin membrane that covers all of your brain and all of your spinal cord. And normally, you really don't see it unless you open up the brain and you're operating.
So I heard that was true too. So just so you know, just to talk about Daddy Reed quickly, the dark personality that is Daddy Reed. DJ says, J. Ray, it was confirmed the other day that they had to clear out the courtroom, which they did. And apparently the Reeds were having words with the O'Keefes, and that Daddy Reed was screaming, this is where it goes back, at Alan Jackson, that he promised that he needs to bring Jen McCabe to his knees the way he promised he would. And that may have happened in front of the jury. I think that's much more likely than smiling or winking or whatever. And then something else happened. He had another, because these Reeds just don't care. They're lawless, don't care about other people and other people's feelings. And they know how to act. They just don't care. They care about themselves, and that's about it. And so that's true that he had another incident. He was warned when they cleared out the courtroom and met with the judge in chambers separately, the O'Keefe family and the Reed family. It was like Team Reed and Team O'Keefe. Then I can believe that. Yeah, I can believe that something very disruptive happened. I just see this. I think someone guessed that he was like winking at the jury or staring them down. I think it's got to be much more disruptive than that for Judge Cannone to make this a permanent thing. I mean, this is the most punishment that anyone's ever gotten in this courtroom. And there's been a lot of shenanigans, from Karen Reed laughing, rolling her eyes, giving the middle finger twice to witnesses. Nothing's happened to her, but that's why I say it was something very disruptive.
When you either have a traumatic event like this, where little vessels are pulling apart underneath that membrane, or, for example, the classic, when you have an aneurysm burst, the space that the aneurysm bleeds to is the subarachnoid space. The other thing that occurs in trauma like this is you can get a subdural. So the dura is the membrane that covers the whole brain and also right down your spinal canal. And it's a very thin membrane that looks like very thin leather. And in that space between the brain and the dura can be a lot of veins that go towards a central vein called the sagittal sinus. And if those tear, you have a venous hemorrhage from, which is not arterial, so it's not quick, but that can develop into a subdural as well. If you tear a portion of your brain as well, and you get a little arterial bleeds, that could create a much faster subdural hematoma. And so when you look at the pathology, the autopsy of his brain, you're looking at a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you're looking at a subdural hemorrhage, neither one of them which was huge or would have required surgery, as well as the contusions that I described in his frontal poles, in his temporal poles, and then the original bang, which was in the occipital area. These are all findings that you would see on a CT scan and an MRI scan without requiring an autopsy if he had made it to the emergency room.
I want to take a step back at the beginning. You said that this.
So he wouldn't even have to have a surgery. He had just made it to the emergency room. If Karen Reed had just called 911, but she has no remorse for anything she does. No feeling for other people. And I've heard people say, well, she didn't do this on purpose because she wouldn't risk her career. She's a risk taker. Of course she would risk her career. She's gotten away with things her whole life. I think similarly to Daddy Reed. This is my theory. So of course she's going to risk it. Number one important thing, most important thing is doing what they want to do, because they want to. She wanted to teach John a lesson, and that was it. She's not thinking about consequences. She'll deal with the consequences. She thinks she can outsmart everyone. She told Aiden Carney to go up to Jen McCabe at her child's sports match and say, you thought you could outsmart Karen Reed. She thinks she will outsmart everyone, and she may. She still may walk. We still may be going towards a hung jury, and they may decide not to retry her, or she could get acquitted. We don't know who's on the jury. They've been trying to poison the jury pool by doing this innocence fraud campaign. They're very powerful. Also, get free Karen readers to lie and get on the jury. So they've been trying to cheat whichever way they can in this case. And this is why it's been so unfortunate, or fortunate for Karen Reed and unfortunate for anyone who cares about justice and fairness in general, that Judge Cannone is the judge on this case. Her courtroom is so out of control. She lets the defense just do whatever they want and flagrantly disregard the law and walk all over her. I mean, do I need to show you the little tape of Yannetti going, I'm trying, Your Honor, like just basically giving Cannone lip. And she backs down. It's like, excuse me, the defense team is in charge of the courtroom here.
Laceration on the back of his head was caused by a fall. Could this be caused by a fall landing on hard ground?
Yes, I mean, like I said, it's a classic blunt trauma laceration.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether this injury, the laceration and the basal fracture, was caused by Mr. O'Keefe falling backwards on the ground?
My opinion is that that's what caused his whole injury.
The pattern of the laceration, do you have an opinion whether that is consistent with hitting the cold, hard ground?
Objection, Your Honor. Can we have sidebar on that, please? So I'm sustaining the objection, so no sidebar. Your Honor.
Do you have an opinion, doctor, about whether that laceration on the back of his head was caused by a particular movement?
Well, the only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull.
Would that type of laceration require Mr. O'Keefe to have hit a line type or ridge type object?
A ridge type of object?
Yes.
No, I mean, like I said, the tearing of the skin in that fashion, you could look it up, would be just a classic blunt trauma injury.
Is there anything about that injury that would suggest to you it had to have been something sharp or ridge-like to cause?
Objection, Your Honor. Begin request kindly to sidebar. All right, we can just
All right, let's move through this. This is a good time to thank some people for supporting the show. Marcie Denton, Carol Holderman, thank you very much for supporting the show via Venmo. This show is listener supported. And if you want to support the show, the links are always in the description of every episode. You can buy me a coffee, you can send me a Venmo, or you can become a Patreon member. All three are great ways to keep these live streams going. All right, let's move past this, shall we? Oh.
So as we were discussing, Dr. Wolf, you said this is a classic fall backwards. Is there anything about the pattern of that laceration that would suggest that there was a ridge or a line type edge that caused that wound?
Not necessarily.
And have you seen, in your experience, similar types of lacerations and breaks caused by falling on hard ground?
Yes, you can see that both in the occipital region. You can see it if patients fall on the forehead. The skin tears, they're still bridging, and then they get bruises.
Some of your work was in Minnesota?
Correct.
Was it a colder part of Minnesota?
Very cold part of Minnesota. It's Minneapolis.
I'm sorry. Did you often see these type of injuries there?
Yes, I mean, we took care of a trauma center, Hennepin County. Very frequently, patients that are drunk fall down on ice sidewalks and could develop, lacerations in their head, epidurals, which are blood clots above the dura because they fracture a bone in the temporal area and they can get a bleed from a fractured artery. And it happens when people are shoveling snow and have a heart attack and fall backwards. So there are various ways that people fall resulting in head injuries and lacerations to their forehead or to different areas of their head.
Can somebody suffer this type of injury simply by falling backwards?
Absolutely.
You had taken us through the process of falling backwards and then talked about what happens to the brain. Can I ask you a couple of detailed questions about that?
Sure.
When you explained that the brain upon impact then shifts forward and hits the front of the skull, is there a medical term for that process?
Well, the medical term is a coup counter coup injury. So the coup is when you first hit. In this case, it was the back of the head, as summarized by the laceration in the back of the head, and the contusions that the pathologist and the ME found in the back of the brain. And then the brain shifts forward, and as it's traveling at a certain velocity, because it's thrust forward on the floor of the base of the skull, it's getting bumped. And it's getting, again, you can think of it as a hammer hitting a thumb. It's getting black and blue in the areas that are sharpest.
Are there symptoms that result of the process coup counter coup?
It's, this is clinically, it varies. I mean, you can go from anywhere from a simple concussion where you sort of are unaware of what happened, but you're still awake, you're confused, all the way to, ultimately being in a coma.
Can this type of injury, the coup counter coup, and what you see in the review of your files, could this type of injury happen from an attack by a weapon, like a bat or a hammer?
Well, he did not have a depressed skull fracture. So any focal hit like that would more likely than not have caused a depressed skull fracture. Blunt trauma, the way he had, the assumption, would cause the coup counter coup without a depressed skull fracture.
When the coup counter coup process happens with the skull fracture, does anything happen to the front of the skull?
Well, you're asking me, does the rest, I mean, the forces, depending on how hard they are, can generate fracture lines all the way to the anterior fossa. So you can have fractures along the lateral temporal area. You can have fractures along the orbital roof. The orbital roof is very thin. And so those forces can go all the way to that area.
Did you see any sign of orbital fractures in Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, he had both the ME and the pictures taken, and the neuropathologist mentioned fractures of the orbital roof.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty how those fractures occurred?
From the trauma.
Could you just explain a little bit how that would happen?
Well, as he fell backwards and he struck his head, it was clearly at a very high speed generated by the gravity. The bone, depending on the quality of his bone, the density, then generated forces. There's a certain amount of lateral give, and then you get a linear force going forward. It drives all the way up the clivus and forward into the anterior fossa where his orbital roofs lay. And this is why people like this get what they call raccoon's eyes.
Do you have an opinion whether the brain itself could have caused the orbital fractures?
No. The brain is a soft substance. You could literally put your finger through the brain. We often operate on people fully awake. The brain couldn't possibly cause a fracture. The fracture was caused by the forces generated through that clivus, that middle bone in the middle of his base of the skull.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not the brain in any way could have caused these orbital fractures?
The answer is absolutely not.
In your study of the records and photographs and in your experience treating these types of injuries, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not a person would remain conscious or would be immediately unconscious after the impact of the ground?
Well, it's impossible to know whether he became immediately unconscious, but his injuries were very substantial. And it's more probable than not that at some point he quickly became unconscious and was unable to do functional activities.
Wow. I mean, so, the good news is that he probably didn't suffer much after. Hopefully, that's what you think, right? If he's unconscious. But wow, this is such a cruel case, you know. They're all awful, but this one's particularly awful.
What does functional activities mean?
The ability to, get himself up and about would be one of the functional activities. The ability to call for help would be a very significant cortical function. And that's why I was talking about, that there's a variation on the theme from a simple concussion to a severe concussion like this.
If a person does not have functional abilities because they are rendered unconscious, does their body, could it still move?
Yes, this is the interesting thing about our brain. So the cortex, which is the top portion of your brain, can get separated from your brainstem functionally. And what happens then is that your body is not acting autonomically, meaning vegetative. So why does that happen? We think it's because as we were a caveman, and if a caveman became unconscious, as an animal came up to eat it, the animal would touch it. Well, you have these automatic movements.
Okay, so this is the last witness, maybe. Curly Girly says, regarding the spoiler on Karen Reed's Lexus, my theory is that Dr. Welchler thinks the spoiler hit his forehead right above the eye, causing the goose egg, not the back of his head, from hitting the ground. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We know the black eyes came from the pressure of the swelling of his brain, but I didn't think about that goose egg. We still have Welchler next week, next Tuesday. Hope you'll watch it with me, starting at 9:00. So I can get back to this if you want. I just wanted to show you Karen Reed. The full interview with Karen Reed is something to behold. She said they asked her if the case was, she says the defense is putting on a more robust case. So it may be, a full week, a week and a half of defense witnesses. But anything would be more robust besides not putting on a defense. But it sounds like they're not calling Proctor. They said, oh, that's to be determined. They're not calling Proctor. They just want to make him this boogeyman for the jury, because actually bringing him in, he might be quite likable. So that's what I think. To me, it sounds like they're not bringing him in. And Karen Reed's not testifying. This is what I got from this interview. Take a listen.
Karen, can you see what the issue with the juror
I cannot.
Jury was? Okay.
No, I cannot.
Wrapping up week 5, how do you feel?
I feel great. I'm anxious. I'm ready to put on our case, which will be more robust than it was last year. So I'm anxious for everyone to learn what we know.
What's the significance of the Proctor?
More witnesses.
What's the
broader and deeper.
What's the significance of the Proctor piece of glass, do you think?
It matched the glass on the bumper, but the bumper glass didn't match the glass, the cocktail glass, the cup. Nothing on the bumper matched the cup.
Did you just hear this? Nothing on the bumper. Just keep that in mind, that nothing, she's saying nothing on the bumper matched the cup. She's got like a PhD in innocence fraud. How to talk out of both sides of your mouth.
One piece on the bumper matched a piece found the second week in February by the former trooper Michael Proctor. So he found a piece at 34 Fairview, allegedly, that matched a piece on the glass, on the bumper.
So there was a match. So there was a match on the bumper that matched the glass. Let me just play this again. Just let me play this again. This is how Karen Reed talks, okay?
Which will be more robust than it was last year. So I'm anxious for everyone to learn what we know.
What's the significance of the Proctor?
More witnesses.
What's the
broader and deeper.
What's the significance of the Proctor piece of glass, do you think?
It matched the glass on the bumper, but the bumper glass didn't match the glass, the cocktail glass, the cup. Nothing on the bumper matched the cup. One piece on the bumper matched a piece found the second week in February by the former trooper Michael Proctor. So he found a piece at 34 Fairview, allegedly, that matched a piece on the glass, on the bumper. Matched the cup. What is the other breaking event of glass? There's multiple sources of glass.
What were your feelings this morning when there was some kind of issue with the jury? What are the emotions?
We've had these before, so we just wait for the judge to evaluate and let it play out, and it all works out.
How do you feel about the jury?
I feel good about the jury. I feel good about our selection, and I feel good.
How about their case? I mean, they're almost wrapping it up. How have you found it to be different, same, similar, etc.?
Yep, abridged, fewer witnesses, and...
Do you think they've been less effective than the last time around?
I don't believe so, but I don't know.
Right. She knows that they've been more. I don't know if it's a more effective case. I go back and forth. Certainly, they haven't made any headway. There hasn't been the surprises, even though I thought they were really minor. A mirrored Sally Port video. I mean, it's kind of a nothing burger. Text messages from Proctor. I mean, there's been nothing. They found nothing that actually proves any of their theories. Not the first time around, not the second time around, because it doesn't exist. Only in the free Karen Reed. It's all from Karen Reed and her lawyer's imagination. I mean, they're lucky. I don't know if they're lucky or they went out and got this judge somehow, finagled to get this judge. But most judges wouldn't even let them argue third party or try to develop it. But I mean, they opened on it again. So, I mean, there's no evidence in the real world of anyone doing this but Karen Reed. All roads lead to Karen Reed.
That's for the jury to say.
Ms. Reed, what did you learn about the jury issue?
The doctor is not a neuropathologist. He doesn't perform autopsies. So I found him not qualified to speak about what a medical examiner should.
Why didn't Mr. Alessi ask him more questions then?
We have our own medical examiner.
When you have some days off, like you have today, what do you intend to do?
I'm going to have a couple days without an alarm and without high heels.
Do you know if they're...
No one's making you wear high heels. I mean, I just can't, right? Stop being buzz. You need to be more positive. Have you ever heard that before? Your Upper West Side is showing? I mean, I think it's a good case. I don't know. I've just been on way too many. I've done so many of these innocence fraud campaigns. Go back 8 years. And I started really investigating a couple years before I even had a podcast. So, I mean, it's like a heavy dose of this stuff I've had. And I lose much more than I win on this side. We lose much more than we win. It's such a rich movement. So, excuse me for being a wet blanket if I am a wet blanket. I think they're doing excellent. I think this is a really strong start. I don't know what the defense has. But wait, who put up, what I wanted to ask someone in the chat, said that Court TV said that she winked at a juror. Was that why they cleared out the courtroom? Because Karen Reed is winking at a juror? Here, cinnamon buns.
You're a beautiful blanket.
My boyfriend says I'm a beautiful blanket, even though I'm wet.
I said you're a beautiful blanket.
Thank you. Am I a wet blanket?
That's a rather personal question to ask me on the air.
I think it's too personal. I think I'm actually strangely positive most of the time, considering what I talk about and immerse myself in, the world I immerse myself in, killers in their innocence fraud campaigns. Cinnamon buns. Did you guys see on Court TV, Karen Reed was caught winking at a juror? Is that what the clearing of the courtroom was about? Cinnamon buns. Inquiring minds want to know. I did not see that. Fill me in. Did they lose their one free Karen Reed juror? Did they? They said everyone came back in. They said all 18 of them came back in. Let me know in chat what's going on.
More than just or is he the only one? I believe that to be the last one. Okay, that is my understanding.
And does your team plan to call Michael Proctor?
TBD. Still TBD. Still TBD.
Watch out, Jesse. Okay.
What about Brian Albert or Brian Higgins?
Ms. Reed, any relaxation planned over the next few days?
No alarms for at least a day. Okay. Thank you.
Miss Reed, what about the shoe? Yeah, I've been here.
Karen Reed hasn't driven in forever, because that's part of her bail agreement is that she not drive, so she's driven everywhere. She seems to be taking very well to being chauffeured all over town. Yeah. So you're just pulling my chain. Yeah, I heard she winked, but not at a juror.
One of them is called decorticating, which is where you draw your arms like this and you throw your feet out. And then a worse neurological situation is when you decerebrate. Now you push your arms out along with your legs. And that would scare off an animal. So we think that over time, genetically, this is what happened to our brains in order to create these. But those kind of movements are not thought processes. In other words, your brain is not telling you, oh, you have pain, go ahead and decorticate or decerebrate. It's an automatic movement in response to pain.
I want you to take us back now to after the fall. Would Mr. O'Keefe, in your study and opinion, have died immediately?
No.
Can you show?
I don't. Yes, I'll tell you. There is very few things that you head injury where you would die, quote, immediately. So if I took a knife and stabbed you in the back of your neck right below your skull and I drove it through your brainstem, you would probably die immediately. If I shot you below your ear and went through and through below your ear and shot through your brainstem, you would die immediately. But traumatic head injuries, you would not die immediately. It's a process. And it's a process of a combination of things. Brain swelling, which takes a while to develop. Decreased blood flow to your brain because you're getting swelling. And ultimately, death of the brainstem that controls your heart and your breathing. And so this is why there's a whole big issue about brain death. You know, when is someone brain dead? Because it's not instant and it can take a long time to be conceived. In these injuries that are very severe that we took care of, there was a high mortality rate. In the linear skull fractures, it was about 67%. But it took time for them to die. It could take days to weeks to months. And also, these people got to shock trauma. So it was a while, whether it was hours, before they were even starting to be taken care of. And yet they weren't dead yet. That's why I don't think it was immediate.
Was there any other observations you made about Mr. O'Keefe or his body that support your opinion that he didn't die immediately?
Yeah, I listened to some of John DePietro's too, but I know they switched seats. But one woman saying now that one juror saying that she was uncomfortable with the defense staring them down. Is that how do they know that? How do they know that? Let me know how they know that for sure. I mean, none of these jurors can talk. The lawyers can't talk. Karen Reed said she couldn't comment on it. So how would they know that? People just making stuff up.
Well, the medical examiner took pictures of his periorbital area and diagnosed raccoon's eyes. So raccoon's eyes occur because there's leakage through the orbital fractures into the periorbital space. Normally, it takes about 24 to 48 hours to develop. It has been noted as early as 1 to 3 hours, which would make it not immediate.
Could we please have Exhibit 14? Dr. Wolf, could you share with us what you see here in this picture?
So right here, you can see the black and blue that sort of configures if he had his eyes open, like what we describe as raccoon's eyes, right? And that's not caused by direct trauma to his eyelids. It's caused by what I described as the basilar skull fracture, which went to the anterior fossa, which is right over the orbit here, inside with leakage of blood products into that periorbital area.
You mentioned that starts or takes at least 1 to 3 hours to begin.
Minimally, yes.
You take that down, please. If Mr. O'Keefe had been brought to a trauma center or emergency room, what would the process be in your experience?
Well, he would have been intubated if he wasn't intubated in the field. One of the first things you need to do in a head injury is control the airway. Why? 2 reasons. One, you want to have enough oxygen going to the brain to feed it. And 2, you want to keep your carbon dioxide down because that causes increased intracranial pressure if it elevates. So you want to constrict the blood vessels a little bit. Then he would have had a CT scan immediately in order to assess whether he has a surgical head injury, meaning he needs to go to the operating room to evacuate something or not. During that process, he's obviously going to be getting medication to decrease.
Excuse me. Can you imagine? This is what I'm thinking about. Excuse me for interrupting in sort of an odd time. But can you imagine how difficult it is for them to say, oh, it looks like he got beat up. They look like dog bites after this, after this expert. I mean, one thing they didn't really clear up is the wounds on his arm very well. Is Dr. Welsh, you're going to clear that up?
The brain
Curious.
Swelling. And from there, you make decisions based on his neurological function and what you're, capable of doing to, spare the brain from the rest of the injuries that will result. One of the things that occurs with contusions is a great medical term is they can blossom, which means they can get bigger. And if they get bigger, they might require surgical intervention to decrease the pressure as well as the volume of the blood that's destroying brain. And so you do serial CT scans in these patients over time, anywhere from every 6 to 12 hours to on a daily basis, depending on what the case-by-case, production of blossoming is occurring.
You mentioned that about 2/3 of your patients who suffer this injury pass.
Correct. What we saw is that in the patients that suffered linear clavicle fractures, 2/3 of them ultimately went on to die, and 1/3 lived.
Is there commonality on how they pass?
So, right. So he has like about a third of a chance of living. But that'll tell you how fatal these injuries are, even when you do get help. But it's just, what a trauma for the O'Keefe family to know that their loved one, died all alone, no one to help them. I think this is, do you guys want to hear more of this, or I feel like I'm getting to kind of like the right near the end, the significant testimony. Right. Karen never called 911. She never called 911. She went to other people before she ever, I think that was some fake looking for him that she did. You wanted me to keep going? Okay. We'll finish this out.
One of the common reasons they passed is if they trapped a major vessel in one of the fractures, they would get a significant brainstem infarct, meaning a stroke, meaning lack of blood flow to a very significant portion of the brainstem. And so that was one of the causes of death that ultimately we understood. And then the others died from the increased intracranial pressure that drove the brainstem down through the foramen magnum.
Did you review any materials that talked about or identified Mr. O'Keefe's body temperature when he was treated?
As I recall, his core temperature was 80 when he was found.
Is that significant in the process and development of his injury from the moment he fell and hit his head until his ultimate passing?
Well, hypothermia, if you define hypothermia, it starts at 95 degrees. Your core temperature is usually about 98, 98.6. 95 is very mild hypothermia. When you get to 82 degrees, you're in severe hypothermia. What happens when you're hypothermic, and I'm a neurosurgeon, but I can tell you that you get into multiple organ failure. Your heart starts to have problems. It can have arrhythmias. You're not breathing. And ultimately, at hypothermia, you also become unconscious and go into a coma-like state. Below 80 degrees, you're probably going to die. So all I can tell you, it wasn't helpful that he had a significant head injury and that he was then found hypothermic.
Is it uncommon in your experience for people that suffer this injury to pass within 5 hours?
Well, none of the patients we treated died within 5 hours, but it also didn't mean that we didn't realize that they were going to be in a potentially vegetative state. When someone's hypothermic, you have to warm them up in order to establish a clinical status, meaning you can't declare someone dead with a temperature of 80. You have to warm them up slowly, appropriately, and then reevaluate where they are clinically.
I've asked you questions about whether you had an opinion about Mr. O'Keefe and when he died. I want to ask it in the form of a formal opinion. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether Mr. O'Keefe died immediately or within 15 minutes?
No, I don't think he died immediately. Neither the hypothermia nor this kind of head injury would kill you immediately in any clinical experience I have.
Dr. Wolf, thank you.
All right.
Let me have a moment, Your Honor. Sure. Thank you.
So listen to how brief Alessi's cross is. He asked him to go through a typical day. And this is usually what a prosecutor would do. It seemed to help the prosecution.
Meeting, welcome.
Thank you.
Sir, can you just describe, you started to do it a little bit on direct, a typical day for you?
I wake up at 4:15 in the morning. I go to my center.
Oh, just the way he smiles is so phony. It's like, oh, that fake smile. And then he's going through his notes, not even listening to the answer the way arrogant lawyers do. Because they're taught, they're trained that the answer doesn't matter. The question is everything. So he's not even listening. He's going on to prepare for his next question. He's not even listening to the answer. Oh, I loathe Alessi. I loathe Jackson and I loathe Yannetti. I loathe Elizabeth Little. But Alessi I have a particular loathing for because he volunteered. It's not even his job. Volunteered to help get a psychopathic cop-killing murderer off.
Set up patients with frames for their either radiosurgical procedures or stereotactic craniotomies. I go home, I make a cappuccino for my wife at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I get back to work at 6:30 and move on. I have patients that I'm operating on, and I have patients that I'm seeing through the day.
What type of patients and what type of work? Just in a typical day. What are you doing? What type of patients and what do you do?
It varies. I mean, I see patients with brain tumors. I see patients with hydrocephalus, which is water in their brain. I see pediatric brain tumors. I see subacute and chronic subdural hematomas, post-traumatic. I see patients with strokes that are being misdiagnosed. I see patients with cancer, metastatic disease. I used to see patients with cervical problems. I stopped doing that 2 years ago. I don't know what else you want me to tell you.
No, that's great. And is that typical day, typical of the type of days you've had for the past month, past few years? Is it generally, without specifics, is it generally?
Correct.
That's another thing where you leave it open. Another thing they tell you not to do, which is just leave it open for the witness to just add all the impressive things about themselves. And you can see him nodding, like, when is this get, like, when Alessi starts nodding, he's like, wrap it up. I really just wanted to, this is just a way for me to set up my next question.
So none of your typical days, none of the past typical months have involved forensic pathology, have they?
You're not a forensic pathologist. I know that what you just said you do is very impressive, but you're not this one thing, right? Thank you, your latex spouse. Appreciate it. Thank you for moderating. Thank you, Maestro. And thank you, Taterbug, for being the best moderators. Appreciate it.
You haven't acted as a forensic pathologist.
I am. If you could have asked that question, very straightforward. I am not a forensic pathologist. I'm a brain surgeon.
Right. And you don't perform autopsies, correct, sir? You're a brain surgeon.
Correct. In other words, I see more brains than the forensic pathologist.
Right. And is it correct to say that?
I thought that was a great answer. It's like, yeah, that means that I actually have more experience in this one area. He's like, don't, you're going to lose. You're going to lose this. That's it. See a little cockiness coming out in this witness in a good way. You're going to lose this, Alessi.
That the brains that you see are of living people?
Correct.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is to go to a different part of the head than was discussed, but sticking with the decedent.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last word.
I'm sorry, with the topic is going to be Mr. O'Keefe, the decedent in this matter, sir. You testified about raccoon eyes. The medical term for that, sir, is ecchymosis, right?
Correct.
And ecchymosis, raccoon eyes, does not cause a laceration to form on an eyelid, does it?
No.
Are you aware that Mr. O'Keefe had a laceration to the outside area of his right upper eyelid?
I am aware that the ME described that. Yes, sir.
Now, could Your Honor, I'm going to, with Your Honor's permission, ask to publish what is already in evidence in a moment.
Okay.
Mr. Wolk,
What exhibit number, Mr. Alessi?
we're going to 165, Your Honor.
Okay. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Wolf, have you seen this photo depiction before today?
I believe I have.
Is it correct that that injury on the upper right eyelid is caused by the application of force directly to that area of the front of the head, again, namely the upper eyelid?
That's possible, yes.
Is it more than possible? Is it probable that that injury was caused by the application of force directly to that area of the front of his head?
Well, an easy answer to that would be is that that's not part of the periorbital ecchymosis.
Thank you, sir. That was exactly going to be my next question. This injury is unrelated to any of what you've been describing, the fall backwards, the force transfer inside the skull, the, as you described it, the dura, the cerebral spinal fluid, all of that dynamic that you so ably described on your direct examination. This injury has nothing to do with that, correct?
Correct.
Thank you for answering my questions. Dr. Wolf, a pleasure again. No more questions at this time.
Right. My murderous client has no more questions for me. So this small injury, it wasn't the cause of his brain injury. I mean, how is that a win? I mean, I guess they're trying to put forward the idea that there's some mystery in how he caused it. Got it. But I don't know. Check notes, right? Check in with Karen Reed. That's what I have for today, guys. Please hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this episode, support the channel. You can buy me a coffee, send a donation via Venmo, or become a patron. Links are in the description of this and every episode. I thank everyone who has supported the channel. I cannot do it without you. As you know, this side of the Free Karen Reed, the opposite of Free Karen Reed is certainly the more minority in the I don't know if it's the more minority in the general population, but in the true crime community, certainly more the minority. And I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for listening. And I will be back very soon. Have a great night, everybody.
I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment. I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system I clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. Carry, gin, like John, you were my mark. My innocence fraud campaign is my biggest hit. Yeah. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system I clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim.